Hey guys, Brigitte with San Diego Seed Company, and today we're going to talk about what we're starting, the seeds that we're starting in February here in our greenhouse. I'm going to give you a bit of a greenhouse tour and just kind of run through the logic of what I'm planting and why. But before I do that, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button so you're notified anytime we put out a video. So let's jump into it. For those of you who follow us and watch our videos, you know that it's been like 4 weeks ago. We posted a video where I was showing what I was starting in the greenhouse, and I was starting my tomatoes and some of my warm season crops a little bit early, and I knew that it was going to be a risk. I knew that some things may not make it, but miraculously everything made it. Everything looks amazing, and you can see here by the look of these tomatoes, they look fabulous. So these guys were started, on the 25th of these are up planted. Let's see. These were started in December on the 8th. So super early, right? And then they were potted up on the 25th of January. So we put them in bigger pots. Why? Because they need it. I mean, look how girthy this stem is. This thing's actually pretty much ready to go into the ground. I'm gonna give it a few more weeks to let the soil temperature warm up and ensure that we're not having any late season frost before I put this into the ground. But this was a gamble that I took that absolutely paid off. Now I'm gonna have these guys ready to go into the ground, and I'm gonna get them out of my greenhouse and into the ground so I have space to start my peppers, my eggplants, and all of my other warm season stuff next. Now, why did I do tomatoes first? And I'll tell you, there's reasoning, there's a method behind my madness. I did tomatoes first because they're the most forgiving. I mean, really, tomatoes germinate so easily. They're easily potted up. There's a reason why it's like the gateway drug of gardening. They're very easy plants to grow. They also, if they outgrow their pots, they'll almost grow basically hydroponically through the bottom of their starts. Let's see if I have got one here, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Here's a good example. So here, this little tomato is almost outgrown its pot, and the roots are down below. I have water in that tray, and they're almost growing hydroponically in the sense that the roots are feeding out off of the water in the bottom, and I keep refilling it and filling up these little bottom trays. So I did that purposely. Now, why did I do these versus like my peppers, my eggplants, things like that? Well, I did it because they're easier, and also peppers require a good amount of heat on the bottom part of the soil when you're starting them. And I knew in December and in January and February, it was not going to be warm enough in this greenhouse for those peppers, and they would likely die from dampening off and other issues because I would have a wet, cool greenhouse where that fungus likes to grow. So tomatoes were a gamble. The other reason why I did it is I had a lot of tomato seeds, so it was not a big deal. If the whole crop failed, I would be okay. So these all look fabulous. They're gonna go in the ground soon. You can see that I've got even more over here that have just been potted up, and I've got to stay on top of watering because they're small and they can dry out quickly in this hot greenhouse, but they're ready to go. So if you look over here, you're gonna see these guys are a little droopy, and if you were a brand new gardener and you came up to this and you just looked at the top, you'd be like, well, these are wet. Why do they look droopy? Well, they look droopy because they were just transplanted not that long ago, and their root systems are not that big. So they're only probably down to here. So I filled this up just before we shot this video to ensure that these guys are getting plenty of moisture. As the moisture moves through these pots, these guys will perk up and they'll be perfectly fine. Another reason why tomatoes are a little more forgiving is because when I plant this on the farm, I'm actually gonna pot it very deep. I'm gonna dig a deep hole and put this in, and that's because you see these little white hairs here? Those are actually roots, and they'll turn into roots when they get put into the ground. So what I'll do is I will actually come in and I will take these little side shoots off, and then I'm gonna plant this so that it's this deep. The soil level will come all the way up to here. That's gonna ensure that A, when it's windy out at our farm, which it is very often, these plants are not gonna get totally blown about and just destroyed. Also, it's giving the plant even more access to soil so that all of these little root hairs can turn into roots, and you just end up having stronger, healthier starts. So Again, tomatoes are so forgiving. It's one of the reasons why it's usually the crop that people start with first as gardeners, and it's one of the reasons why tomatoes are so diverse, is because everyone loves growing them. So you'll see over here, tomatoes are a lot bigger. You can kind of see by the size of them who was planted first. We've got these guys. They were the earliest planted. And then moving on, these guys get a little bit smaller. If we pop over to this side, you can see a few weeks later, I started these guys, and they're a lot smaller, and they're gonna continue to grow. You can see that on these trays here, I've actually thinned them down to 1 tomato. These guys over here haven't done that yet, and look at the difference. They're spindly, and they are crowded. They really need to be separated and put into each individual pot, which we'll get to eventually. You don't have to just pull this guy out and toss him. What I would recommend is that you actually take this out. You can see here, I can easily pull these apart. Now I have 2 tomatoes. And the beautiful thing about having 2 tomatoes is if you only need 1, you can share this with a neighbor. So you can see in our greenhouse, we don't typically have the time or the capability to plant everything at once. And it actually works out by succession planting and having plants at different ages and stages. It just makes it a little bit easier to stagger all the work. You can see here, these guys are a little bit smaller. And the other thing I want to really point out is that it's so easy, especially as a new gardener who's really passionate about growing food, you forget about flowers. Flowers are an essential part of a happy and healthy ecosystem, and it actually helps with the equilibrium of a garden by inviting good insects to combat the bad insects. It's also just beautiful to look at. So when you're starting all of your tomatoes this spring and your warm season crops, make sure you don't forget about flowers. This is actually statice. It is such an easy to grow flower, and these have just been potted up not that long ago. They look beautiful, and one of the reasons why I love them is I have statice flowers in my office that I harvested last summer that still look amazing. They keep their color, and it's an easy to grow beautiful cut flower. So when you're doing all of your seeds starting this spring, don't forget to plant stuff just because it's beautiful. That is a-okay. Okay, so you've seen what I've planted in my greenhouse, and you've seen that we took a little bit of a risk to start stuff early and it worked out. Sometimes it doesn't. I've had massive failures, so just keep that in mind. But it was a risk that we were willing to take, and it did pay off. In our next videos, we're going to be talking about what you need to be seed starting now, moving into spring, and helping you get prepped so you can make sure this spring and this summer gives you the most bountiful garden ever. So stay tuned, because we're going to go through when you plant your peppers, your tomatoes, your squash, all of your summer crops. We're going to go through them one by one and tell you when you want to start them in zone 9 and 10 so that you are ready for this spring.